Hello, my name's Richard and I'm the Clinical Programmes Lead for Jenks and Giraffe. Today we're going to be starting a new video series around an occupational approach to postural management. So within this series we're going to look at a few different topics. First of all, why functional seating is important in terms of participation and engagement. We'll be having a look whether a lack of opportunity can limit or hinder a child's development, how occupational performance relates to postural management. We'll also discuss different holistic and client-centred approaches to enable independence, function and engagement. We'll have a look at the ICF framework and the F words. And then we'll also take a look at the social model of disability versus the current medical model that's in place. So for today, we're going to take a look at occupational engagement and participation. And that's going to include, first of all, a refresher on the three main aims of postural management. We'll be delving a little bit deeper into one of those aims, which is function, and we're going to look at that through an occupational lens. We'll take a look at occupational injustice and deprivation and how this can impact a child's development and engagement. How a robust postural management program can help to improve occupational performance. We'll also have a look at the gold standard of posture versus functional posture. So in terms of a little bit of a refresher, when we think of postural management and managing the posture of people with complex disabilities, there are three main aims that we're looking to achieve. So we're first of all looking to minimise damage. So that might be things like contractures or skeletal deformities or internal organ damage. A reduction of energy expenditure, so reducing someone's fatigue and effort throughout the day. But the aim that we're going to focus on mainly today is function, so allowing a child to be as independent as possible. Previously, we've produced another series of videos around postural management, and this is really focusing on the other two aims that we've just mentioned now around minimising damage and reducing energy expenditure. So within that series, there are 5 videos. An introduction to postural management, which is kind of a nice overview of what it means. It goes into a little bit more detail of the work by Pauline Pope, who coined the term of postural management or physical management within that. The second video is more based on anatomy and biomechanics. The third is secondary complications, so what can happen as a result of somebody having poor posture who's also got complex disabilities. And then the last 2 videos are more around building a stable posture, so how to actually do that within different positions, and then also assessing posture, so knowing what interventions might need to happen from your assessments. So just to briefly go over some of the other learning in the other series. So minimising damage, what that means, like we've discussed, is the reduction of risk to musculoskeletal and internal damages. So that might be contractures, like we've said, or malformation or hip subluxation, that sort of thing. And now reduction of energy expenditure, as we've gone into further detail in the other series, is the amount of energy that we spend throughout the day just doing our kind of day-to-day things that we as able-bodied people don't particularly think about too much. For example, just holding our sitting postures or our lying postures or standing. For people with complex disabilities, this can reduce their energy so much throughout the day so that they're not able to actually engage in the activities that are more meaningful to them, such as for our children that we kind of deal with, engaging in educational therapy programs. So today we're going to be focusing, like I say, on the function aspect of that, so allowing children to be as independent as possible. So whether that's through communication and play. So as you can see here within some of these images, is a kind of a good example of why posture is so important for those things. As you can see here, we've got the two young ladies sat opposite each other with fairly good head position, so they're able to make eye contact and engage with each other. Often a lot of the children that we work with may be non-verbal, so if they're not in the correct posture and they're not able to make eye contact, it kind of takes them away from the world, and they have less opportunity to actually communicate as they rely on eye contact and with different communication devices. So before we go on any further, I've mentioned the word occupation a number of times, so I think it's important just to kind of define what that term means, as a lot of people relate occupation to vocation, of it meaning what I do for work, whereas in terms of occupational therapy and an occupational focus that we're going to look at today, it means a variety of different things. So here are a few different examples and different quotes of what the term means. So we can just quickly go through those. So the things that people do to occupy their time and attention, meaningful, purposeful activities, the personal activities that the individual chooses or needs to engage in, and the ways in which each individual actually experiences them. So just to sum up what that could mean in terms of occupation is the things throughout the day that we either need to do, that we want to do, or that we're expected to do. So typically we can look at that through two different versions of occupations, our purposeful and meaningful occupations. So when we mention purposeful occupations, these relate more so to the things throughout the day that we have to do to generally survive. So whether that's feeding ourselves, bathing ourselves, eating, doing all what we call the activities of daily living for ourselves to actually function. So these are the things throughout the day that we must complete in order to go through our day. Whereas meaningful occupations are more around the things that kind of we get out of bed for. So whether that's particular hobbies that we have interests in, engaging in relations with our friends and loved ones, going to school can be a very, very meaningful occupation for a lot of the children that we see, for example. So occupational justice is another term that we're going to be using quite a bit throughout this video. So it's quite important to really define what that means. So we've got a few examples on screen now of what this could mean. So in terms of what we want to do in life, so our meaningful and purposeful occupations. So justice is being able to do that and having an environment or being in a construct that allows us to actually do the things that we want or need to do in life without hindrance or barriers. And there's a lot of evidence that's linked to health and well-being around that, and how being able to engage as occupational beings in activities especially leads to a lot more better outcomes in terms of our own mental health, but also physical health as well. So if we think about justice of being able to engage in those activities. Another term that would be useful to define is social justice. So in terms of this slide that we have in front of us, I think it's a really nice one just to really illustrate what we mean by the different terms that are quite commonly used. So you probably heard the term equality, equity, social justice perhaps, and often they're kind of used interchangeably, whereas they are actually quite different. So as you can see on the left hand side of this image, we've got reality, where there's one person that's has got lots of resources and lots of boxes and is able to kind of view the baseball game very easily, has got a great bird's eye view, whereas the person next to him has got less resources, but it's just enough for him to be able to see the baseball game, whereas the other one, his starting point is just so low, without any kind of assistance, he's got kind of no opportunity to even engage with the baseball game. So when we think of equality, this basically means giving everybody exactly the same thing. So not really kind of treating people as individuals. It's just kind of a blanket a blanket idea that just give everybody the same thing and then it's fair. So as you can see, the two people out of this equation will be able to watch the baseball game, whereas still the person that started so low to begin with doesn't have the resources and has still not got enough for him to be able to actually engage in the baseball game. So we have equity here as the next one. So this is more individualized. So they've taken a look at the individuals, the three individuals here, seen what their needs are. Turns out the guy that started with all the boxes didn't particularly need them, and he can actually just stand up over the fence and see the baseball game. Just one box is needed for the next person, and it's more equitable now because the person who had the most needs now has the support they need to be able to also engage at the same level as everybody else. Whereas social justice, that is where we remove the barriers completely. So in this case, it was the fence that was stopping the people actually watching the baseball game. And if we remove that, then there's no need for kind of adjustments or considering people's differences in a way that's going to impact society. So by removing those barriers, it creates justice for everybody to engage, for example. So when we think of occupational justice for the children that we see day to day, so it's about giving the opportunity for play and socialising with peers, the opportunity for learning, so a conducive environment for that to happen in, and understanding the individual's needs for that. Also the roles that children play within their own family, so playing the role of someone's son or daughter, or engaging with your siblings is a really big and important part of growing up and developing. And then also being able to access the community as well, and being active within our own community and society, often due to the lack of resources in the community that would allow people with disabilities to access different areas, whether that's in terms of someone's need for using the bathroom, for example. If those things aren't in place, it can hinder and stop people from engaging in the activities that they want to do. So the next term that we're going to look at is occupational injustice. So if occupational justice means to be able to do the things that we want to do and engage in the activities, injustice is the restrictions of someone's freedom to actually engage in those occupations. So there's quite a lot of evidence as well around injustices leading on to what's called deprivation, which actually impacts someone's mental health and physical health quite negatively. So some of the typical things that can happen from having or not being able to engage in your occupations, and the injustice of that happening externally to you, so whether that's the environment not being conducive for it, or political or societal kind of reasons why you can't engage in things. Some of the problems around that would be around exclusion, which can lead to lower self-esteem. If we've got a lack of opportunities to engage and participate, there could be a delay in children's development, whether that's cognitive, socially, or educationally. It only increases stigma as well. So if people don't have the opportunities to access things in the community and are not seen in society, it only heightens that stigma that's already in place. And like we've discussed, this can also negatively impact someone's well-being and health. It can also be very isolating and lead to more sedentary behaviours, so where people aren't moving and aren't engaging in activity as much, which then can lead to physical health issues as well. So another term that we're going to define is occupational deprivation. So in terms of the word deprivation, we have probably understand this in a few different contexts. So if we think of a medical terminology of deprivation, whether someone is sleep or oxygen deprived, it usually leads to ill health or worst case scenario, death. If we think of deprived access to something, it's whether something is taken away from us or we're not allowed to access something, and it tends to be outside of our control. Whereas if we think of occupational deprivation, this is not being able to engage in those meaningful or purposeful occupations due to external factors. So for example, we wouldn't be able to a very good example actually would be the pandemic. So we weren't able to go to work due to the pandemic and the restrictions there and the isolation that we needed to do. So we were deprived of going to work. Whether that was a good or bad thing for you is another thing. But if that kind of continues, it can lead to negative impacts in our health and well-being if we're not able to do the things that we need or really that we want to do in life. So occupational deprivation or in terms of the children that we see day to day, if they're not able to engage in play activities because the environment isn't set up for them in a way that they're able to access it, they won't be able to engage in those playtime, for example. So that can lead to a lack of social inclusion, engagement and participation, which is known to lead also to negative health and well-being, impacts on someone's health and well-being. But also in terms of educational, emotional and social skills, it can either put a big delay on this, but also if someone's deprived of that, it's going to also delay them in their own development as well. So we're going to take a look at a study now. So this study is looking at occupational injustice. So the title of the study is Are Playgrounds a Case of Occupational Injustice? Experiences of Parents of Children with Disabilities. So the study interviews 18 parents of children with disabilities about their children's experience with playgrounds. So it's examining playgrounds from an occupational justice perspective. And the idea is that the study could be or advocate for accessible playgrounds and the needs for that for children with disabilities. So as you can see, they interviewed 18 parents of different genders and variety of ages, and their children who have a form of disability, whether that's a physical or a visual impairment, intellectual disabilities, or kind of multiple disabilities. And again, that was a mix of boys and girls of similar ages, between the ages of about 7 and 12. So just a little bit of a background of the study. So we kind of know what we're looking at. Like I mentioned, it's a qualitative study, so it's through a semi-structured interview where they started off with a very broad question of just asking the parents about their experiences of the playground, with a few more structured questions around what they thought around the children's play activities on the playground, the accessibility, whether they're able to participate, and depending on some of the questions, some more follow-up questions were asked. So it was a very qualitative study and getting the opinions of the parents. So the interviews were recorded in approximately 45 to 60 minutes, and the findings were broken into 3 different categories. So the first category was titled Different Views of the Same Problem. So there's a few kind of quotes from the parents on screen, but if we go through what was kind of discussed within this section. So all the parents expressed that accessibility to playgrounds was a problem, and that problem influenced their child's in a number of different ways. So some of the parents actually expressed that their child's disability and not the environment was kind of the reason that it was so difficult for them to engage in the actual playground. They couldn't see that changing the environment could actually make the playgrounds more accessible for their child. However, all the parents thought that a well-planned playground would be beneficial for children by allowing them to play without more help that they were kind of currently getting from their parents. This would in turn increase the chances that they'd be able to play with friends, also make new friends and socially engage with other children. But they still saw that their child's disability was the main reason for the child not being able to actually use the playground. However, there was some parents that expressed that the problem lay within the playground itself and the way it was designed and built. The parents concluded that a change is needed in the way that the playgrounds were built, but that it should be society rather than them who's responsible for that. So it's kind of changing things on a much larger scale. Some of them also expressed anger towards their children's schools and communities for not building more accessible playgrounds as well. So the next category that was discussed was an environment filled with difficulties for play activities. So again, we've got some examples on the screen for you from the parents directly. But to summarise, all the parents expressed that the playground represented an environment filled with difficulties for their children. They described how the physical environment's lack of accessibility prevented their children's access to this social environment. Some of the parents thought that most of the equipment on the playgrounds was too difficult for their child to use, since it involved usually climbing or being very physical. The parents described how this lack of access led to embarrassment for their child when they realised that they weren't able to access the playground at the same terms as the other children. Some of the parents also described how the playground that was only partially accessible could cause their child even more embarrassment, as the fact that the child could partly participate, but then there was a lot of disruption within that. All parents noted that their presence was required when their child visited playgrounds. Many children couldn't even get close enough to the playground where the other children were playing without help. So as a result of this, the children missed opportunities to make friends at the playground since the presence of the parent was necessary. And often the parents saw themselves as the obstacle and the barrier in terms of the children engaging with the other children in the playground. In fact, one mother said, I feel I'm with him too much. The other children talk to me instead of talking to him. It feels like I'm in the way. So it's quite sad that as a parent you have to, or you would have actually acknowledged that you're in a way part of the problem, because it kind of limits the independence of the child and their own kind of social learning and experience. Then the final section and category that the answers were summed up in would be is a circumvented environment. So it's looking more kind of at the environment itself. So according to the parents, the main reason their children had previously enjoyed playgrounds was because there were other children there. Another reason was that the children were small enough to be carried or helped without being different from the other children. So at that age, it was quite common for children to be helped and carried by the parents, whereas they had stayed requiring that assistance where the other children had progressed. So in general, a playground was not a pleasant place for their child to be. As a result, many parents stopped thinking of playgrounds as a place to visit because of the difficulties involved both for them and their children. So not only did the parents not think about asking the child if they still wanted to access the playgrounds, also the children stopped expressing the actual wish and volition to go to the playground. Which this meant that the parents presumed that their children wouldn't want to access it because they basically stopped talking about it. One of the parents actually described that once or twice they'd taken their child to a playground that had temporarily been set up supporting children with disabilities, and just how much their child enjoyed this. One father actually noted that his son had enjoyed it so much that he thought maybe he actually likes to play after all. So he had kind of had the impression that his child no longer enjoyed playing because of all the barriers that were actually in the way. So to kind of summarise the findings of this study, obviously it's very much geared towards accessibility of the playground. And although there are laws and legislations in place for playgrounds to be accessible, clearly it's evident that it's not being implemented through the parents that were interviewed. The findings also indicate the ability to use or not use a playground can affect the whole family. So not just the child itself, but the kind of emotional and social well-being of the parents as well as the children. Looking at playgrounds from an occupational justice perspective can be a way for parents and occupational therapists and other healthcare workers to actually advocate for more accessibility for playgrounds and also more adaptive equipment to assist with children accessing playgrounds and engaging in activity. As a first step towards enabling children with disabilities to participate in play and activities in such environments, it's important to consider from a social participation standpoint that participating in civil society by shaping policies promotes health equalities in communities. So that's more around those laws and legislations that are in place and the advocacy of those and improving and pushing that forward. Building playgrounds based on the principles of universal design could be one way to promote occupational justice for all, as kind of how they summed up their study. So taking kind of that learning from accessibility and that kind of the idea of social justice and removing barriers or making things equitable, allowing people to engage at the same level, we're going to take a look at occupational performance and how engaging with those ideas of equity and social justice can help children actually perform better. So in terms of, again, if we just quickly define the term occupational performance, it's kind of straightforward, really. It's how we actually perform those activities that we want to do. So, for example, if handwriting is something that's really important to us and we want to engage in that, if we've got a lot of different things that are stopping us from doing that, whether it be a diagnosis or we've got issues around kind of motor strengths, things like that, these can all impact our ability to perform that occupation. So it's just some of the ways that postural management can improve occupational performance. So the ability of offloading body weight through different segments of the body. So if we're not able to hold sitting balance, for example, having external supports to actually allow us to sit upright and take away the requirement for us to hold that position ourselves can put the focus on the actual task itself. And whether it's, like we mentioned, handwriting, having the correct supports in place to be able to see the paper. So our head position needs to be correct. Our seating position needs to be conducive for that. And if we have different needs for that, so whether that's a physical thing that needs to be adjusted, how that kind of affects the task itself. So we're not thinking of I know that I've just listed a lot of impairments there, but we're not thinking of this as an impairment focused thing. We're looking at the child wanting to practice handwriting. That's the occupational task. So if we work backwards from there, that's how we can kind of build our intervention. So not so much focused on the child having cerebral palsy, for example, and they require this and this because they've got a lot of tone in their body, starting with the focus being handwriting and working backwards is a more occupational way to kind of approach that problem. So as you can see, there's a few different examples on screen as well around creating a good midline position to work on fine and gross motor skills. We mentioned the idea of being eye level for communication as well and engagement. And and promoting active positions rather than static postures. So often we think of postural management, or it can be explained in such a way that's focused on very static positioning, whereas we want to be as active as possible, and our next posture is our best posture, that sort of idea. So where possible, we want to be promoting that. Just some other considerations as well to think of. So any contraindications, that are in place that we need to acknowledge as well. So we need to know the individual as a whole, which in the next video, we're actually going to go onto a little bit more detail around that. So understanding the individual's needs and being very client focused is imperative to understand any contraindications. Gold standard versus functional positioning. So in our previous video series, we kind of go through a lot of the biomechanics of seating, for example, and different positions and what we kind of look for in terms of angles, and it's all very important. However, if achieving that gold standard impacts our ability to actually function and do the things that we want to do, then there needs to be a balance in place. So it's really measuring up what the actual kind of occupation is in this circumstance. So if sitting bolt upright tires out a child too much so that they can't actually engage with their occupation, then we're not really being conducive in terms of their kind of occupations and their health. Also, we need to consider pain and comfort as well. So if someone has got very or has a lot of tone, for example, or taking a gradual approach to different positions is also important. And also that kind of ties in with the other two main aims of postural management as well, which we've gone through in the other video series. And we need to kind of use that as a whole to make clinical judgments and professional reasoning of why someone might need a certain intervention. So it's taking the look at the whole picture and taking a more occupational approach. So kind of a strength-based top-down approach. So that's where we look at what the child is capable of doing and what we can promote in terms of their independence, and kind of work backwards from there, rather than focusing on someone's impairment or their a lack of ability to do something. Look at what they can do first and then work kind of backwards from that. So just to summarise, we've looked at a lot of different terms, so around occupations being both meaningful and purposeful, so those things in life that we need to do each day in order to survive, and the tasks throughout the day that we all have to do, as well as the meaningful occupations that we derive a lot of satisfaction from, and that really impact our health and well-being in positive ways. We've looked at injustices around occupation and deprivation, and the kind of the negative impacts of that, and the terms of lack of engagement and participation, limiting children's opportunities to progress and develop and engage in meaningful occupations, as well as building relationships within their social kind of network. Also, we spoke about taking a holistic approach to seating assessments, so not just kind of going through our kind of physical assessments, but also knowing the child as a whole, of the things that they need to do in the day, and linking that to the interventions and postural management that we put into place for that child. We really do need to understand what they need to do in the day. We're not putting children in pieces of equipment just to sit or stand there. Why does that child need to sit and stand there, and focus on that being an occupational approach rather than kind of an impairment one. We also took a look at postural management, how it can impact occupational performance as well. So thinking about how alignment and how having the correct supports in place can actually improve someone's occupational performance. Again, the other video series goes into that a little bit further around the actual implementation of the certain equipments we might put in place to assist someone to do that. So the next video is around the social model of disability. So we'll go into a little bit more detail about what that entails and look at the current medical model and how they differ, and how we can be a little bit more socially minded, perhaps when we are implementing our interventions. So thank you very much for listening. I hope this has been useful, and I'll see you in the next video.